This hangout is on air and live. So ready for our intro theme? Here we go. Hooray! There we
Hooray!
go. Don't use that nearly enough. Okay, so I'd like to welcome everybody for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about what is truth. What does that word mean? What are we trying to accomplish when we use an idea like this? So the background, like what's the motivation for this idea? Like it sounds like one of those deep philosophical questions for the ages. And there's probably as many stupid answers to this question as there are people who've tried to answer it. But it's an important question to really ask because, as like a recurring theme you may have noticed in this video channel is the idea of epistemology. That religion is not the problem. I don't specifically think religion needs to go away. The thing that needs to go away is bad epistemology. Religion is just a symptom of bad ways of looking at the world and looking for truth and defining what truth is when you think you found it. So oftentimes what I find when I'm having discussions with Christians is they don't even know what truth means. They don't know how to recognize it when they see it. They just have a terrible sense of epistemology. So 9 times out of 10, it seems like a lot of our disagreements and a lot of problems would just be solved if we could agree what is truth? What does that word represent? And just especially, how do you know the truth when you see it? So that's the background, and especially something I'm thinking of is I'd like to do is kind of a video tutorial of this, just little 5-minute videos that ask a question like, what is truth? And we'll just define that word in a strict, rigorous, coherent way that is consistent with what logicians and philosophers tend to think of when they hear that word, truth. So what's your experience with this?
Oh, mine?
Yeah.
Well, when you mean what's my experience as far as like my formal training on what it is, or just in dealing with other people?
Both. You know, what is your kind of background?
Just overall?
Overall.
Oh, well, what with all the math I've done, it's set down very formally about what truth is, and it's based purely on axiomatic logic. Where you can just take any kind of sentence and you say, is that sentence true or not? So that's where it can go. But then there's also the really big precursor, mathematically speaking, to say that the sentence in question has to be a logical statement, and not every sentence gets to do that. So you're already, I want to say, placing yourself on very formal grounds, very solid grounding when you're saying you're dealing with truth statements, truth values from logical statements, not just any old sentence.
So that's a really good point to bring up first. When you say, propositions are true and they're false. And this is like the first major misconception I've always seen when people ask, what is truth? Like, for example, if you were to say, Bill is speaking the truth, you're not saying that literal platonic essence of truthiness is flowing out of his mouth.
Well, you're also not probably saying it literally. He probably didn't say, quote, the truth. No, right. Again, this is just a regular sentence that you just put out there, and it's already on very ambiguous grounds. You have to go back and say, no, really, what are you saying when you said that he speaks the truth?
Yeah, so obviously there's no such thing as like essence of truthiness unto itself. It's not like there's some cosmic force of truth interwoven into the fabric of space and time. When you say Bill is speaking the truth, technically what you're really saying is Bill is speaking propositions.
Yes.
And those propositions have the property.
That have an assignment of truth to them. Yeah.
Yeah, like
And
we haven't gotten to that part yet. But you're saying
yeah, I just think this is
have the distinct property of being true. Like that's a more grammatically and meaningfully correct way to describe it.
Yeah.
So, like right off the bat, when someone says something to the effect of does truth exist or does absolute truth, technically the answer is no. Truth is not even a thing. It's a lot like asking if bigness exists. Just because you expressed it as a noun doesn't mean there's an actual referent in that sense.
Right. Well, if you really think about it, truth is always used as an adjective, not a noun.
Yes,
It's
that's
a property
correctly
of a thing.
the way to say it. It's when you talk about does truth exist, what you really mean is to say is are there propositions that exist which have the distinct property of being true? Like that's the correct way to frame the question. It's like saying do big houses exist? Sure, I can look at big houses and I can look at small houses, but there's no such thing as raw essence of bigness all by itself in the strictest sense.
Does big exist?
Does big exist? Yeah, that's a meaningless sort of question to ask. So like right off the bat, you see this a lot in Christian philosophy where they just rabble on about truth and absolute truth, and you can already tell like before even looking at anything else that they don't even grammatically know what they're saying.
Well, maybe they do in their own context, to be fair, but if you want to have an argument under logical discourse, well, then I'd have to start scrutinizing what you mean by when you say something is true.
Right, exactly. So it's a game that they're trying to play that follows into a script where they're trying to play gotcha with you. They'll say, "Does truth exist?" And you're like, "Well, not exactly." And they're like, "Well, is that true?" And you're like, "Well, yeah, it's a true thing to say." And they're like, "Gotcha, therefore truth exists." And you're like, "No, dude, slow down. That's not how this stuff works." True propositions can exist, but truth itself is not a thing. You're trying to clarify these ideas, and it's very frustrating that like this is the foundation of all philosophy itself, and people still screw it up.
Yeah, and even if there is some magical essence of truthness that's out there in like a Platonic sense, that how do you then make the connection between whatever proposition you're making to that truthiness out there? It's not part. You still have to make this distinction between what you're saying and the truth of what you're saying. So I don't really care if it actually exists all on its own. It's still meaningless to me because it's the connections that we try to make that give these things meaning. That's why we want to say something is true.
Yes. So another common another common confusion I've seen is people talk about truth as being like a synonym for reality. Like the X-Files, their big catchline was "the truth is out there," and you have to be careful what you mean by that because it's not like you're gonna go out hiking one day and look under some rock and be like, "There, I found truth." No, like you're not gonna find truth out there in reality. Or when they talk about the truth of the matter, they often really mean like the facts of the matter, and that's a perfectly okay colloquial use of the term, but that's not really how we use it in a strict philosophical and especially in the mathematically logical sense.
Yeah, and by and large, to say it simply as that thing is true, it's already collectively understood that we're saying that this propositional statement has a truth assignment to it. But then pointing that out at parties is, I think, the reason why I and other mathematicians are, well, not very well received.
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to talk about something like an absolute, universal, mind-independent, objective reality, that's fine. That's a meaningful thing to talk about. There's a world out there beyond your immediate sensory perception. And I am perfectly willing to say, yes, it's absolute. It's the same for everybody. It's universal. Your opinion on that external reality doesn't change the facts of the matter. But that's not really what the word truth is designed to refer to, because you can't know that reality. You're disconnected from it. You have sense data that you can talk about just fine, and you can commit to actions and see what the consequences are, but the problem of skepticism, of course, is that you're just detached from reality. You don't have that fundamental perception of the world outside your immediate mental awareness.
Right, and if you weren't detached from reality, then you would know the actual truth behind any of these statements, and it wouldn't even be questioned.
Yeah,
but here we are questioning it.
It's not useful to talk about truth in that sense, because in the strictest philosophical sense, you can't know the truth if you define it that way. It's not something that can be known. You can talk about it and guess and wave your hands, but there's always that philosophical doubt that means you cannot have absolute perfect certainty on that truth.
Yeah, it's just an acceptance of our limitation.
Right, so that's a common confusion I see as well, is if you want to talk about that absolute truth, well, you can have an absolute mind-independent reality, but you can't perfectly know it in the strictest sense. So that's why, most philosophers and atheists, they cringe when they hear this idea of absolute truth, because it's a very poorly defined idea that mixes and matches concepts together into something that is not what the words really mean. So
yeah, and this is why I'm glad that philosophers from long ago even try to acknowledge this and really try to hammer down a solid definition for truth.
Mm-hmm. So what is a good definition for truth, then, that we should be asking? What does that word really mean, and how do we use it correctly in sentences? That's kind of the major theme for this hangout that I want to flesh out. So before anything else, it's always important to stop and recognize that truth is just a word. It's just letters and consonants thrown together into some noun. So there is no such thing as a correct definition.
Adjective, though, right?
Adjective. Now, well, truth is technically a noun that's a nounifies the adjective of true and false, in a sense. But you know what I mean.
Uh-huh.
It's a word. Haha. Very good. Truth is just a word. We can define words however we want. There's no such thing as a correct definition. And again, this is just a huge confusion that always buggers me and just bothers me every time I see people confuse it, is you can define words however you want. If we decide tomorrow that truth is that feeling you get after eating peanut butter, then that's what that word will mean. And if everybody just decides to arbitrarily adopt that convention, then that's officially what the word truth will mean.
Or if you just want to mess with someone and someone's trying to get you to acknowledge the truth of something, and all you have to do is say, nope, that's not my truth.
It's not my truth. I define that word differently from you. So this is a problem, of course, in basic communication. There's no such thing as a correct definition. So if you're going to do good philosophy and have good, meaningful, logical discussions with people, you have to define what your words mean and agree to use those definitions.
It's that agreement that's a hard thing. But
yeah, getting people to agree is surprisingly difficult, especially when the agreement is sort of unilaterally acknowledged among professionals. That anybody who formally studies this stuff should, in principle, understand these definitions. So yet another frustration I always have is people wearing their philosophical expertise on their shoulder, or just bragging about how amazing they are at philosophy and at logic, and then just totally failing on very basic foundational definitions for what true propositions are.
Yeah, when I've had plenty of times, which I'm sure you have had as well, where if you're trying to have some kind of, YouTube comment where it's not a debate between you and someone else, it's really just an education.
Yeah.
This isn't a debate. I'm just trying to explain to you, these are the rules. This is how we should actually do this. This is a lesson for you.
Yeah, this is oftentimes what discussions with apologists boil down to, is we're not even debating anymore. I'm explaining basic epistemology to you people. So, but that's okay. It's just frustrating because to deal with someone who acts as if they are experts on something they're dismally unqualified to even talk about. So, but I don't want to vent too much. I want to really flesh out this idea. So like we said, there's no such thing as a correct definition. But what we can say is there are good definitions and bad definitions. Like there are useful definitions. There are definitions that are concrete and precise. There are definitions that are consistent with what people imagine when they hear certain words. Those are definitions that we say are good, functional definitions. A bad definition would be inconsistent. Bad definitions would be like deepities, things that sound profound but don't actually cohere in any meaningful concept.
Yeah.
Or bad definitions can just be words that are completely detached with what people mean when they use a word. Like, again, the peanut butter example. I define truth as that distinct feeling you get after eating peanut butter. That's a perfectly valid and coherent definition, but nobody else in the world thinks of that when they hear the word truth.
Yeah.
So a good definition has to at least kind of
agreed upon,
have something to do with propositions and assigning them some sort of measure against reality, in a sense. That's what we're trying to go for when we think of a good definition.
Yeah.
But again, even if a definition is popular, if you can show that it's just meaningless or inconsistent, then inconsistency beats popularity. Sorry. So this is another common thing you'll see is people have a sort of agreed upon definition that's just terrible and meaningless or useless. So with that in mind, we're going to look at the idea of truth from a perspective of philosophical and mathematical logic. And in this context, there is a rigorous definition. It's universally agreed upon in all the textbooks, and hardly anybody seems to really understand it. So I want to have this discussion to really flesh it out, what it is and what it isn't, and we can kind of progress from here.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a good start.
And just, in case anybody is wondering, I happen to have here an Introduction to Mathematical Logic by Richard Hodel. Any book that says the words mathematical logic or proof theory on its cover will more or less be consistent with what we're talking about today. So I just want to throw that out there to emphasize, no, really, we're not making this stuff up. This is the definition that professionals and that experts use, that people who know what they're talking about will talk about truth in this context. And you can even back me up. You're the guy who's got his master's in mathematics. I'm just an engineer. What do I know, right?
Yeah, you applied mathematician.
Yeah, that's actually a sidebar joke. Is I'll say I'm an engineer, and then people will complain, well, what do you know about mathematics? I'm like, I've actually studied a lot of mathematics, actually, as an engineer. Sorry. I technically am a qualified mathematician in many respects. So, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. So now we're going to get to the question of what is truth? Well, we've decided truth is not really a synonym for reality. We already have a word for reality. It's called reality, the facts of the matter. But truth isn't that. We sometimes casually associate it with that, but strictly speaking, that's not what truth really is.
Yeah.
We also know truth is not some mystical Platonic essence by itself. If you're a Platonist, you can probably go down that road and you will be completely counterfactual to what everybody else in the world of logic and philosophy thinks. So you're welcome to try and push your definition, but this is not really what people think about when they talk about truth. So strictly speaking, at the end of the day, a truth value is an element of a set of truth. There are only two elements. It's a binary set that contains two elements called true and false. And technically speaking, that is all truth is. We even call them truth values. So what you can say is propositions are true or they are false.
Well, so again, that's even that is shorthand.
Yeah, we'll get to the more formal definition in a second. But the thing to always understand, propositions can either be true or false. So when I talk about truth, it's a set of two elements that I use as labels for propositions. So this is an idea I've driven home a lot in several videos. Truth is just a label. You can think of it like a giant rubber stamp. I get out a piece of paper, I scribble down some English sentence on it, and I hand it to you, and you have a giant rubber stamp, and you just, bam, I hereby label this proposition true, or this proposition false. I could have just as easily used tasty and foul, pleasant and awful, up or down. It's just
okay. Yeah, I can. Again, I could even try and one up you here. You could have, like, write down a propositional statement on a piece of paper, and then on a separate sheet of paper, write down true or not true.
Yes.
And put these two pieces of paper side by side.
Uh-huh.
There you go. So there's truth or not true to your right. There's your statement to the left. Again, anyone can say, so what? There's the truth right there, right next to the statement, but it's meaningless at this point.
That is true. We have to decide what are the rules by which I assign truth to propositions.
Yeah, it's that. So I want to emphasize that it's that assignment. If I want to draw a line from your statement to either the true or not true, that connection is what is meaningful.
Yeah, so this is another common confusion, is this idea that truth is some intrinsic essence of the proposition itself. And again, that's totally wrong. That is not how, just because I'm spewing out words, there isn't some, there's no cosmic essence of truthiness interwoven in my propositions that I can somehow measure with a truthometer. It's a label. It's an assignment. You hand me a proposition, I will apply some algorithm. And then when I'm finished with my algorithm, I will decide officially, I declare this proposition true, stamp. Or I'll just take my little sticky note that says true, and I'll stick it on that piece of paper. Or one of my favorites is the buckets. You have a bucket that says true and a bucket that says false, and I'll just wad it up, there's some paper here, crinkle it up, and just throw it in the bucket. Okay? Everything in this bucket is officially a true proposition because I say so. And everything in the false bucket is now officially false because that's what we've assigned them to be.
Yeah, and nobody can stop you from doing that.
Right. Now you can complain a lot. You could say I'm being inconsistent. You could say I'm using meaningless rules or just being random.
Well, I don't like how you assign that into the bucket. I would have put it in the other one. Meh.
Yeah. So what? This is like a real serious question.
Yeah.
So what? Screw you. Now
So it's a hard thing to take in, but it's left to us humans to figure out what we would like out of assigning truthy values to propositional statements or not. And keeping it in a very general context like that, we can get into more solid examples, but you have to be a bit more careful with how you choose something to be true if you actually want to get some sort of results out of it.
Yeah, so that's the meat of the question, is what are the rules by which you pick the bucket to throw that piece of paper into? Or that problem?
Or I would say, why have we convened on the rules that stand for logic?
Yeah, so what makes certain rules better than others now? That's a more meaningful question to look at. And there's actually a word for this, again, straight from the textbook. It's called a truth assignment function. And all it says...
Okay, see, I got to point out right here.
Yeah.
It's mathematics and mathematicians. It takes a very creative mind to really come up with something new, something ingenious in how to, say, prove a theorem. But I'm telling you, for mathematicians, they are horrible at how they name things.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a perfectly straightforward name.
It's always the perfectly straightforward approach.
They should have named it after some guy, like the Copenhagen function or something. Is that what you mean? The declaration of truthiness.
Again, you didn't have to settle on what should we call the truth assignment function? I have an idea. Let's call it the truth assignment function.
Yeah. It's not the most creative.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it is so pervasive in so many things, in all theories of math. I just find it funny, comical. That is a tangent.
Okay.
And that's just me ranting.
So a good example is I get out a piece of paper. I'll just write it down here. Snow is white. Okay. Now what? I hand that to you.
Okay.
You now have what's called a truth assignment, which is some function, some rule set that says, here's a proposition. Does it deserve to be true or does it deserve to be false? Which of those set elements will I map it to? So technically, the correct mathematical definition for a truth assignment function is a mapping operator between the set of linguistic propositions and the binary truth set.
Yep.
That's the very dry technical way of saying it. But really, at the end of the day, it's just, here's a proposition. Tell me, which label are you going to give it, and why? So what are the rules you use? So now what's interesting is you read these textbooks on logic, they don't really answer that question. That is the deep philosophical question. What functions do you use to assign truth? Because once I actually assign a truth value to it, I can do all sorts of cool things with it, like logical manipulations. I can what do you have? The logical and, logical or operations, disjunction and conjunction. I can disjoin it and conjoin it with other propositions.
Oh, absolutely. It's once you have a collection of propositional statements with a known truth value assigned to them, then logic allows you to make other connections between those statements and understand what the truth value will be to them.
Right. So right off the bat,
it doesn't tell you if it's true.
No problem. This is another wonderful point I've always tried to emphasize. It's just what you said is, once we've assigned truth to it, logic can now operate on it. But by itself, without that assignment, logic is powerless. Like if I were to say snow is white, is that true or false? There is no amount of logical deduction you can perform on that proposition to assign it a truth value, to arrive at some truth value or deduce a truth value. You have to start with the truth value first, and then logic can do things to it.
Right.
So this is what I have always tried to say, is pure logic in and of itself can't tell you a damn thing about objective reality. It only allows you to manipulate the truth values of your propositions by creating formulas. But that's a whole other discussion by itself. But again, like, this is what you see a lot of people totally misconstruing the idea of logic, is they think that logic is like this window into reality, that if I just think really hard about things, I can logically prove that God exists or something. Like, no, you can't do that. Logic, by definition, cannot help you there.
Yeah, even just by a basic sentence like snow is white. I could agree with you or disagree with you, and I can make valid arguments for both.
Exactly. Like
where is the snow? Is it in a dark room, in the complete absence of any source of light? Well, then I'm going to say it has no color at all, and if anything, it's black, because that's all you can see in that dark room.
Yeah. Or so what if I peed in it? It's yellow snow. Uh-oh. Don't eat the yellow snow, as they say.
Or and just on the flip side of that coin, I could say, well, if you look at the reflective index of snow, the visible color spectrum comes right back out at you. I'm going to say, yep, it's white. But that's only under the condition that light is actually hitting it in the visible sense, of which we can have received in our retinas.
Right.
So again, just to say snow is white, just to be mathematical on it, there's not enough information in that propositional statement to check against. You have to give me more conditions of what's happening.
Oh yeah, I could ask, is whiteness an intrinsic property of snow, or is it a property of you, the perceiver, looking at the snow?
Yeah.
So, like, what does it mean? So, if I were to say it's true, well, what have I really said? that there's this intrinsic essence of whiteness to snow, or that all observers who look at pure snow will see white. So notice, like, again, what's the correct truth assignment to give to these little simple
Well,
problems?
again, what was the correct set of conditions that led up to that sentence? Snow is white.
Let's take it even further, like, because now we're getting to the next point I want to talk about is what is the correct truth assignment function?
Uh-huh. What is the best one out there?
Yes. So again, we have the same problem. There's no such thing as a absolute truth assignment function. You can assign truth to propositions however your little heart desires. So I've got a nice list here of different examples of way that you could choose out of your own volition to assign truth to propositions. So the simplest is the unilateral declaration. That is, false or true doesn't even exist. Everything is false. You hand me a proposition, it immediately goes into the false bucket. There, done.
It's valid as a logical system. That'll work. Yeah.
Yes, all propositions are false. Now what? So what?
Well, I would say, just to nitpick, if everything is false, then so if I hand you a propositional statement that says
false.
Snow is white, you throw it false, and then I say, well, what about this next one I just wrote down? Snow is not white.
False.
But then
So,
do you want to worry about contradictions under your logical system?
Okay. We see this. Do we like consistency? Well, a good way to look at this is, what if by false I simply mean you have spoken a coherent proposition?
Uh-huh.
So that just changed the meaning of what false represents. Because if all propositions are false, simply saying that is false is equivalent to saying that was a proposition.
Yeah.
So the propositions themselves don't have to be consistent with each other. They just have to be propositions. But obviously that's not what we mean when we talk about a truth assignment or a truth value. We want to capture more than just the fact that you said a coherent sentence.
Grant, okay, so consistency, we'd like truth to be consistent, so that is a criteria for something to be effectively true.
Yes, we'll get to that in a little bit. Why consistency is important.
Oh, okay. So you're far more prepared on this discussion than I am. So what's the next on your bullet point?
So how about this as a truth assignment function? I will flip a coin, and if it's heads, I'll throw it in the truth bin. And if it's false, I'll throw it in the false bin.
Oh yeah, sure. Random assignment each time.
Yes. Then if I pull it out of the bin and try it again, I might go in the other bin. So
sure.
White could flip-flop between bins depending on my coin toss. Well, again, what have I said at the end of the day? All it means is, at the end of the day, truth is the outcome of a coin toss when you handed me a proposition. That's a perfectly coherent way to define a truth assignment, but it's not capturing what we want a truth assignment to do.
Fair enough. So what else do you have?
Another wonderful example would be the biblical truth assignment. This is the Ken Ham school of epistemology now. So now I'm not being funny, I'm being dead serious, where there are people in this world who literally define truth as that which is consistent with the Bible.
Oh yeah, he's very, very outwardly spoken, I'll say, on that.
Yes. And there's a famous quote from Answers in Genesis that I like to throw up in videos every now and then. But it's basically, he says, by definition, no perceived fact about history or the world or cosmology, if it contradicts with the Bible, can ever be true. States it just categorically.
Yeah, yeah.
So what do you think are some problems with that truth assignment?
Well, it's almost as bad as just everything is false.
In a sense, all you've said at the end of the day is, if this proposition is true, all you've said is, this proposition does not contradict the Bible. Does that capture this idea of truth, that we want truth to kind of have this connection to objective reality or efficient communication of ideas?
Yeah, probably not, because
Right.
the Bible, it's only so long, it only says so many things. how
Right.
many propositional statements are possible that we know are false, yet would not be consistent with said Bible?
Yeah.
It no, not
So
the best ways go.
yeah, exactly. So that's again not a useful truth assignment because why not just pick another book? I've got over here. Here we go. Classical Electrodynamics by John David Jackson. Okay. By definition, no proposition which contradicts classical electrodynamics can never be false or true. True. So, okay. All I've said in that sentence is truth is anything that you say which is consistent with the scribblings in that book.
Yeah.
Okay, why not just define consistency with the book? I mean, if I've never heard of the Bible, but I've heard of truth, that's not really going to connect with me very well. How am I going to use that concept in a logical format and solve real problems with it?
Yeah, and which copy of this book are you talking
Yeah,
about? Maybe
which
there was a
copy
printer
of the
error.
Bible?
In the
The King James Version? The New American Translation? Strong's Hebrew Lexicon? Or Strong Literal Translation, I think is what it's
whichever.
called. I think it's Young's Literal Translation. I think is what it's called. Or what about the original manuscripts, which we don't have? So now I've just said truth is this thing that cannot even be measured at all because I don't have any referent for it.
Yeah, nothing to compare it against. Yeah.
So that's a bad definition for truth. I'm just going to state that categorically. How about the axiomatic approach?
Well, it's similar to the biblical approach, where you're just saying, here's my things that I'm going to say are true.
Well, in a sense, yes. The axiomatic system of truth simply says, here is a proposition, A equals A. I declare that proposition to be true.
Yeah, well, okay, so I should also point out here, it's in dealing with formal axiomatic systems here, the particular set of axioms are very carefully chosen.
Right, we're not just pulling axioms out of thin air, but it's important to recognize them for what they are. An axiomatic approach simply starts with rote declarations of a specific proposition. So the biblical approach, said, here is everything in the Bible. I say it's true. The axiomatic approach is a little different in that you're specifically singling out certain propositions, not in huge literary texts in a sense.
Yeah, and like the first example there, the law of identity, it's something that we can agree upon that happens in this reality.
Well,
the reality that we all share.
Yes and no. What we're saying is, I hereby declare the definition of equality to be such that any propositional formula with something on the left side of an equal sign and that same thing on the right side of it, that is just summarily true because that's what I want equality to represent.
Yeah.
Sameness being same, in a sense. You can't derive that proposition out of anything. You can, however, just declare it to be true and then work with it after the fact using propositional logic.
Yeah.
So that's called the axiomatic approach. Now, this is kind of an interesting discussion unto itself because this is how all mathematics is built, as you just single out a handful of very precise propositions and you just declare them to be true by fiat.
Yeah, I have to say I do appreciate that system because well, you have these set of axioms, they are true, and then you build from them. As a mathematician, I never had to really worry about no, really, are these axioms true? How deep down the the rabbit hole do you want to go with that? But
well,
at least with math,
that's the rock bottom. They're true because you said so.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
it's if you want to actually contest the truth of the axioms that you're given, you're going back into the philosophical realm. No, really, should these be the axioms that are true? Mm-hmm. But in math, you just say nope. That's that. You're not doing math anymore if you're going to talk about that.
So a lot of people will complain that the axiomatic approach is circular or begs the question, whatever. And the answer is, yep, they absolutely do. They are true purely because we just decided we wanted them to be true.
Well, it's for math at least. You have to. If you really wanted to, you could remain skeptical of any propositional statement. And if you're really not sure of where the truth of something is, well, then that's it. It's you can remain skeptical for as deep as you want to go. But if you do so, you never actually get to the truth of the matter. That was a bad pun. Yeah, you're either stuck with questioning. Well, no, I'm just saying you're either stuck with questioning an axiom's truth, or you just say, okay, we got to start somewhere. It might as well be with, if I see a number, it equals that number. And that's an okay place to start in my book.
Well, this is a point I've always had to explain to people is there's nothing wrong with a circular argument when all you're doing is defining a concept. And this is basically what mathematics does, is it declares certain things axiomatically true because they represent concepts that we want to work with.
Well, yeah, I would say with any logical system, you're going to have to start somewhere because logic does not tell you how to assign truth. It just allows you to connect logical statements and preserve truth values through separate statements.
Right.
But it never says what is true. So in math, you just start with a formal set of axioms, and the same thing happens with really basic logical axioms, like you pointed out, the law of identity: A equals A. If A is true, then A is true.
Technically, this is a pet peeve. I have to correct you now.
Okay.
It's not the law of identity. It is the reflexive law of equality.
Oh, okay.
The logical law of identity. The logical law of identity is A implies A.
Sorry, that's correct. Yeah.
Sorry, I see people mess that one up all the time, and it irks me.
No, in math, that is also an axiom, the reflexive law of equality, where if A equals B, then it implies B equals A. That is true.
Yes. So, no, that's the commutative law of equality now. Sorry. Nitpick. But in any case, this is how, for example, but it's easy to show, like, we can now prove that 1 plus 1 equals 2 by this fact alone. We just simply declare outright there exists a set called the natural numbers, and it contains an element called 1.
Yeah.
That is a true proposition by rote fiat, because I have just defined the set.
Yeah.
And I can define mathematical sets however I want. The next axiom I need is for every natural number there exists another natural number called the successor to it.
Yeah.
And from those two axioms I now have there exists a natural number called 1, and there now exists another natural number which is the successor to 1. So there is 1, and what is the successor to 1? Well, it's the successor to 1.
Yeah, but that sounds a little long to say.
Right.
Might as well come up with it. We might as well just define the successor of 1 as something easier to say.
So what do you want to define the successor of 1 to be?
I don't know, off the top of my head, I'll just call it 2.
Oh, okay. So the successor of 1 is 2. There. We just proved 1 plus 1 equals 2 by rote categorical fiat. Because we just stated our definitions and the rules that we can use to manipulate with them and work with them. And that's it. Like, there it is. It's that simple. So this is just sort of a sidebar. Like, this is why mathematical Platonism is categorically dumb. Is the numbers don't exist. We just defined them into existence using rules and definitions. And that's the process. I could have.
Well, hold on. I didn't call them numbers. I was just saying we're talking about set elements, and, well, that's it.
I specifically called it the set of natural numbers.
Yeah, but you never said what a number was.
Well, it's an element of the set. By definition. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a set that I just defined. And if it satisfies these properties, it is officially a natural number. Because that's what I've defined it to be.
Fair enough.
So, okay. So the only point of this discussion is to show axiomatic theories of truth are actually perfectly valid, as long as you're not trying to make rote declarations about objective reality. We just defined ideas and how we can manipulate things between them. So that's an important distinction to make. There's nothing circular with defining terms. And mathematics is just built on those exact kinds of rote definitions and assertions.
Yeah, sure. And many interesting consequences from these definitions follow.
Yes.
But ultimately, that's the starting point.
Uh-huh. So,
I should probably stop you right here for just 1 second. We are, I believe, going to look through these YouTube comments and comment on comments at some point.
Oh, that's right. We're almost done here. We've got another 4 or 5 talking points to get through.
Okay, but I'm just saying, for anyone listening in right now, haha, you could put in a comment and we might actually respond.
Yes. So moving
unprecedented in these meditate. Okay.
Unprecedented audience interaction. Yes. So where'd my talking points? There we go. So we can see how the axiomatic system works, and there's also a very simple way to abuse the axiomatic system, because something I've seen actual Christians do is they'll just declare by rote axiomatic fiat, it is true that God exists.
Oh, there you go, the presuppositionalism.
Basically, yeah. Why? You're not defining anything. You just made a rote declaration about reality. What's to stop me from doing the opposite? God doesn't exist by axiomatic fiat. Now what?
Yeah.
So that's
there.
Not
well, okay, so I could also point out right here, if you're going to talk about mathematical axioms, as opposed to what we'd like to do is lay down axioms for talking about reality, you're going to use a different set of axioms.
Yes, we'll get to that in a bit, and that has a lot to do with kind of the analytic synthetic distinction, which is you're 2 steps ahead of me. The next theory of truth, the assignment function I want to talk about, is called mental incorrigibility, and this is one I think has a lot of use. And all mental incorrigibility says is any proposition you make about immediate sense data or mental awareness of some kind, I'm going to call that true, as long as you say it sincerely and honestly.
Okay,
so,
okay.
An example of this would be something like, I feel hunger, I have an itch, I like pizza,
I'm looking at that snow and it is white.
Yes, I am looking what appears to be snow and it appears to be white to me. I perceive whiteness. Or you could also use things like definitions, like I define truth as that sticky sensation of eating peanut butter. These are all incorrigible propositions. You cannot be wrong in a statement of what you perceive. At least I think that's a perfectly useful framing point to lump in a huge category of propositions.
Well, okay, so maybe it's not perfect, but it's certainly a good starting point.
Yeah, there are some people who actually think they should that this is disputable, but I kind of subscribe, like, this is a good starting point. It's kind of right there with Cartesian skepticism. I can doubt everything, but I'm obviously experiencing stuff, and if I'm experiencing things, then I'm probably a thing that exists, because things that don't exist don't experience. So I'm apparently a thing that exists, and I'm experiencing things. These are more or less incorrigible propositions. So I could say, I perceive stuff. Things that perceive stuff I define as a subset of the things that exist. Then by propositional logic, I've just equivalently said I'm a thing that exists. So what we have is a system where incorrigibility plus axioms gives me a huge, useful category of talking about stuff. Do you agree?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
So I think that's a good starting point. I don't think it's greedy to just say, it is true that I see a chair. I see an empirical arrangement of stuff. I will give it a label of chairness, and then I will say I officially see a chair. That doesn't mean.
And I cannot dispute how true that is to you. But then again, we're talking about if you're dealing with an incorrigible sense awareness, then yeah, if you perceive a chair, then you perceive a chair. But the problem, I'm going to say, starts when I want to look at where you're looking, and maybe I don't perceive a chair.
And that's fine. This is sort of the Jonathan Nash problem, where if you're schizophrenic and you see a little girl and no one else sees her, or there's that guy following you and talking to you that nobody else sees, well, it's still true for you that you see and perceive these people. It's just not true that other people will. Yeah. But it's still an incorrigible fact of your perceptual awareness. I see a chair. Maybe you don't, but I do.
Sure.
So I think that makes a great starting point of truth assignment. All incorrigible propositions are true. That just gives us a nice categorical realm of places to start. Because I think analytic propositions are a subset of incorrigible. Because all you've effectively said is, I see a bunch of stuff. I shall officially label that as a chair. Therefore, I see a chair. And so, you can work with definitions.
Okay. I see where you're going with this. I'm okay with this.
Yeah. And I don't think this is terribly controversial. You might have, certain instances where you dispute how this might trip you up, but I think realistically speaking, this is a good functional starting point of a solid truth assignment epistemology.
Sure.
Along with the axioms. So now we have the question of, well, okay, I see a chair. It's a definite true proposition that I see this chair here, but what is the chair really? If I sit in the chair, will it support my weight? Is it made of actual wood, or is it just styrofoam painted black?
Mm-hmm.
Is it made of atoms, or is it made of some phlogiston stuff? Some ethereal...
Or maybe someone very carefully painted what looks to be a chair, given your perspective at that particular spot.
Yes, so maybe it's an illusion
of forced perspective.
Exactly. I may see a chair, but it may not really be a thing that's there. It could be an illusion presented to me.
Yeah, and you miscategorized it under your own perception.
Right. So now we have this problem of external world skepticism. Just because I see a chair doesn't mean I perceive the underlying metaphysical ontological essence of the thing. So this is, I think, a great dividing line between analytic and synthetic propositions. Although, like I said, I think a better third category would be incorrigible propositions, analytic, and then synthetic, in a sense. So this leaves us with a problem. How do I measure truth of a statement about that external mind-independent world?
How indeed.
Yes. Yeah, now this is where I think a lot of people really start tripping up. Because one common theory of truth is called the correspondence theory. That, if I say there is a chair there, and in fact there's a chair there, well, then it's true. My proposition was true. That's sort of a naive way of talking about truth, because the problem is I still have no connection to that reality. How do I verify whether or not there really is a chair?
Yeah, I got to tell you, I used to really like saying that something is true if it corresponds with reality, but even then, how do you ensure the correspondence?
Well, how do I recognize correspondence when I see it? Because the only thing I can see is what I see in my sense perception. So you're left. All you've said is true is whatever is true, in a sense.
Yeah, and you're left with a tautology. If it's really there, then yes, it's true. And if it's true, it's really there. Okay, so is it?
It's like you're basically trying to correspond English propositions to a mind-independent reality. How the hell do you do that? That's like I like to say that's like trying to correspond apples with the moon. There's a bit of a divide between those things. So strictly speaking, correspondence theory doesn't really work in that deep sense because we still need a way to measure correspondence when we see it.
It's how we'd like it to work, so at least it gives us a direction on how to figure out what's true, but it's not yet perfect.
Yeah, that's a good point to make. It's not that it's wrong, it's just incomplete. It just reframed the same problem in different words. So truth, it'll be a true proposition if it corresponds with reality.
Okay, so is the correspondence true?
But did it correspond
Yeah,
or
so
not?
you're right back to your starting point. Yeah.
So where's this correspondence? How do I know it when I see it? So this brings us to the pragmatic theory of truth. And this is where I think pragmatism really solves a lot of problems. And you'll find people who just kick and scream at the concept of pragmatism. But I think this is kind of what the goal of science is all about, is how to finally make that last connection between a linguistic proposition and that mind-independent reality. So in the pragmatic world, one thing you just acknowledge is you are utterly disconnected from that world. You have no immediate perception of it. Just accept that and get over it. But what you can do is commit to actions and observe their consequences. So
yeah.
In a sense, one thing I said before is you can't just pop open a can of reality and look inside and see what the facts of the matter are.
Yeah, and I could also point out that when it comes to strictly in a philosophical sense, if you want to deal with the pure philosophical consequences of pragmatism, yeah, I could say there are issues, but we're not trying to deal with all of those things. We're just trying to settle, in more of a scientific sense, how to understand truth.
Well, you say issues. I would just say there are fundamental limits to what you can know with perfection.
No, I'm just trying to acknowledge.
I mean, are they features, are they bugs, or are they just categorical philosophical problems that cannot be overcome, and we just have to throw up our hands and live with them?
Which I am fine with. I'm just acknowledging there are
philosophical
ramifications with saying, let's go pragmatism.
Right.
That said, yes, I like pragmatism.
Right. But that's kind of how pragmatic theory would work. It'd say, if there really is a chair there, well then go ahead and sit in it. And if you can sit in it and it doesn't seem to collapse and it holds your weight and you can feel it and experience it in a consistent way, well, there you go. That's about as true as it's going to get. Right? And if you go ahead and you sit in it and the thing collapses and you fall over, or it was just an illusion and you go through some hologram, well, then it was false, wasn't it?
Yeah, but again here, when you're dealing with, to say that incorrigible sensory perception is true, at least, you cannot compare your sensory perception of the world to the world. That's the problem of your external world reality there. However, at least with pragmatism, if you go and actually sit on the chair, you're gaining more sensory perception, and now again you're comparing your own sensory perceptions to sensory perceptions.
In a sense. Well, I like to think of it in terms of, beliefs drive actions and actions have consequences. You can perceive things, you can draw these mental images of it, you can define terms all you want, but you can't define the consequences to your actions. So if I go out and I just sit in the chair, then if it works, then that's a satisfactory state of affairs to call it a chair.
Yeah, and those consequences have perceptions, and if those perceptions are consistent with the earlier ones you had, it's fair enough to say that everything still is true and works out.
Exactly, right. So a lot of people will claim, like, well, you don't really know for sure that there was a chair there. Maybe you're still being fooled by Laplace's demon, or you're still hallucinating, or you're dreaming, or something to that effect.
Again, that's a rabbit hole. Just as much as in math, it's another rabbit hole. Okay, you could never accept anything to be true. Okay, well then, where does that leave you? Without any truth at all.
Yeah, and yeah, you're left in a point where you can't assign truth to anything now because you can't be absolutely sure.
Yeah, so if you want to jump down that rabbit hole, go for it. Just don't expect me to follow you, because I would like to actually start somewhere and build some truth off that.
Yeah, it's like I'm trying to solve problems here. It is a functional way to work with the world when you start making decisions and seeing what works and what doesn't. And I'd even go so far as to say that fundamental pragmatism is what drives the incorrigibility and the axiomatic approaches to begin with. Because we don't just pick axioms mathematically willy-nilly. We are trying to describe things that we regularly encounter in the real world and assign a coherent, consistent, formal language to it. And then, if I have a meaningful model, I go out and make decisions and see what happens. And if it works, it works. Great. Who cares about the underlying metaphysics of everything? Like, I've got a beer. I've got a job and a roof over my head. Everything's working out for me now. I'm solving problems.
It's as true as it needs to be.
It's as true as it's going to get, I would even say. You're never going to get more truth than that. That is the best you can philosophically hope to accomplish. Now, I could be wrong about that, and I'd love to see somebody come up with something better, but you do have the fundamental problem where when you reject pragmatism, you put yourself in a place where you're utterly irrelevant. You're measuring truth in respect to something totally detached from your actions and consequences.
Yeah, if you want to measure truth by consequences, well, if you don't like that, why argue?
Yeah. What outcome you're hoping to accomplish then by even arguing the fact if you don't care about consequences? And I would even go so far as to say it cannot be avoided, because you have this mental image of how reality works, and you make decisions based on how you think you understand reality. And if you have a bad understanding, then it's not going to be long before you'll make bad decisions. And I always like to use the example of if you fundamentally reject pragmatism, then it won't be long before you walk out in the street and get hit by a bus. Because that's what happens when you detach your beliefs from actions and consequences. You just start doing things for no particular reason because you have your beliefs over here in their little bubble and the decisions you make over here in this little bubble and no real crosstalk between the two.
Oh, yeah, and I'm Wile E. Coyote. I can walk off the ledge of a very high cliff and not worry about falling down.
Yeah, so
who needs consequences?
This is why you really can't dispute pragmatism, because whether you agree with it or not, you're still living your life by it. And if you actually tried to live in a way that was pragmatism-free, you would be squashed by a bus tomorrow. You would fall off a cliff. You would jump out a window. You would do something stupid that gets you killed. And in fact, I even go so far as to say that's the reason why anybody believes anything about the world at all, is so that you can use that information as a guide for your actions. True beliefs allow us to make good decisions with reliable, predictable consequences, while false beliefs fail in that goal. So this is kind of the ultimate truth assignment for a synthetic proposition. And if you notice,
now, what is a synthetic proposition?
It's a statement that isn't axiomatic. It's not definitional. It's not an incorrigible statement of sensory data. It is a proposition about the external world outside of your mind, usually framed in the context of actions and consequences. A synthetic proposition will say something like, if there really is a chair there, then if I sit in it, it will support my weight and be comfy.
Yeah. Okay.
So that
I'm
is
just selling, just making sure that these definitions are spoken.
And this is important because people conflate the two very often. They'll say, well, I see the chair there, and they'll say that's synthetic just because they see it. or they mix and match definitional things like mathematics with synthetics, and it just doesn't work that way. There's also the a priori versus the a posteriori distinction, which is similar to the analytic synthetic, just kind of slightly nuanced. But it's the same idea. You have statements within your subjective awareness about sense data and words and definitions, and then there's just the stuff beyond. So
yeah, that's what we're stuck with.
Yeah, you can talk about that world beyond all you want, but the fundamental measure of whether or not it's true is what actions can I commit to and what consequences will follow, and do they follow? So this is a core principle.
I think that by and large resolves the correspondence problem.
Yeah, I think that's a satisfactory description, and maybe someone can find a can of reality somewhere that we can pop open and work with. But until then, I think this is more or less what we're stuck with. And you'll notice this kind of captures the essence of a lot of how science works, in that I cannot prove anything absolutely true about objective reality.
Well, yeah, so there you go, as a natural consequence of your external world skepticism, you have to remain tentative. I mean, you have the whole issue tentativism, to say that even though I think it's true now, I might come across more information later that I'll then have to switch it around and say, nope, it's just not actually true.
Right. So what you've effectively said is not how to assign truth to propositions. You've only said how true propositions will behave. The problem is false propositions can mimic that behavior as well. But you can get to a point where, at the very least, I can tell what's false. That's kind of the idea of science. I can falsify things, but I can't prove things true in the strictest sense. I have a model of how the world is, and if that model is correct, if it is true, I should be able to commit to actions X and see consequences Y.
Oh yeah, it's like saying, look at that puddle over there. That looks like the surface of that puddle is flat.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like it's true until you actually, get down on your hands and feet and you really start eyeballing that puddle. And even then, it still looks pretty flat. But if you really start to measure it, and I mean really accurately measure it, there will be some slight curvature to it.
Yeah. So that's kind of the idea of actions and consequence. I know how true propositions behave, but I can at least show propositions that are false. That is, I can't be absolutely sure or certain of the chair being there, but I can at least be certain of a chair not being there, because if I try and sit in it and it collapses, then it definitely wasn't a chair.
Yeah. But so again, there's your notion of falsifiability.
Yes. So this is a key idea in science, that you can't really prove models about the world true, but you can certainly declare them to be false. So a lot of what science is a truth assignment that just says this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. This thing might be wrong, might be probably right, and you just disprove lots of other things until you're left with something that just seems to consistently work.
Something that holds up against scrutiny of everyone else trying to make it false.
Yeah, and eventually you just get to a point where you say, you know what, screw it, we've tried our best to prove this thing wrong. It still might be wrong, but it's working well enough.
Someone smarter than I might come up with a way of showing it's wrong, but for now, damn it, it's true.
Yeah, even though you recognize it might not be that absolute deep philosophical truth. It's good enough for government works. Let's work with it.
It'll work for now. Yeah.
So a few final thoughts before we start entertaining some audience questions. Some important understanding about truth is, like, we talked about this this binary truth value set. Truth is an element, or true and false are elements of the set of truth values, or truth is an element of the set of truth value being either true or false. And propositions to them. So a fun question to ask is, why limit ourselves to only a binary system?
Why not?
Why not? So you have what's called tri-state logic, which says you have true, false, and other. So a good joke is true, false, and maybe. Or in logical circuits, it'll be true, false, and off. Which is an important distinction sometimes when you're sending digital bits. You have 1s, 0s, and nothing at all, in a sense. So why not come up with a truth assignment that maps propositions to a tri-state logic?
Well, nothing stops you.
Exactly. There's no reason why you can't do that. And there are, in fact, logical systems called tri-state logic that do exactly that. So this is another sort of one of those jabs at the absolute truthers. Like, what truths values are we even talking about? Why should I stick with the simple binary propositional set? I mean, we even talked about a unitary or what would you call a set with only one element in it?
That.
So we had the binary truth.
No, yeah, okay, well,
truth is a set that contains one element.
yeah.
We talked about that one.
But then, well, I mean, just I mean, mess with this. I mean, you could start just saying that your truth set is the null set.
Yeah, nothing's true or false. It's not even a thing.
Everything is nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not very useful, but there's the pragmatic perspective again. It's just not a useful concept to help us communicate if we just say everything is nothing.
Everything is assigned to nothing. Just yeah.
And that's an important question to ask. That's a perfectly great theory you have going there, but what can I do with it? Whoop-de freaking do. So tri-state logic, again, has limited applications in communication theory, where I can send ones, I can send zeros, or I can just be off entirely. Because sometimes you're not careful.
Nothing wrong with it, and it's just that we've found some application to that system of logic. Not to say it's ubiquitous, or it can be used all over the place. It's unnecessary.
It has a place where you can use it and you can talk about it efficiently, and there's no reason why I couldn't shoehorn it in the propositional logic. Another alternative logic set for truth assignment is, why not have truth values be a real number between 0 and 1, or 0 and infinity?
Oh, okay, so now you're getting into like fuzzy logic.
Yeah. I call it the continuum of buckets, because we had the truth buckets.
Okay.
3 buckets or 4 buckets, or just some giant measuring tape bucket thing. If I put it here in the middle, its truth value is 0.5. And again, there are times where you might want to talk about the world in this way. So fuzzy logic is an example of that. Like the classic demo might be if I just flip a coin and it is in a superposition of heads and tails. So I might say its truth value, in a sense, is 0.5. It could go either way. If I told you it was a weighted coin, I could say its heads probability is like 0.7. So you notice, like, this is an interesting way of talking about truth in a sense of probabilities and certainties, is if you map it to a real number in this sense. And this is, in fact, the axiomatic system of probability theory is more or less exactly that. So you can talk about your confidence in a sense, or the truth confidence, or the truth value in terms of a real number instead of this binary set. Why not?
Yeah.
Or you may have heard the Dawkins scale. How confident are you that God doesn't exist on a scale of 1 to 7? Where 1 is absolutely exists and 7 is absolutely positively doesn't exist, and Dawkins puts himself at like a 6.9, right?
Right. But I think he's just, the scientist in him will never allow the 7.
Right, and that kind of gets back to the pragmatic theory. But you can see how you have this concept of confidence kind of working its way into a truth assignment in a strict sense. So I can talk about truth now not as this binary mapping, but as a measure of my confidence that this proposition measures or represents reality.
Yeah, it's now you're starting to skirt on the notion of, like, I feel it in my gut, so it's true.
Yeah.
Which
it is worked out a lot and it works great, so let's just declare our confidence in this.
Yeah, to just have it a measure of confidence of how much you think something is true. Again, it's a perfectly valid system, but it depends on how you use it.
Yeah. What problems can you solve with it? What can you talk about in a meaningful way?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
No, that was just feedback.
No, I refreshing the comments to see if anything new has been posted here.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so that's the concept of truth in a nutshell. Like, there's a lot of different ways we can take this. I think a good discussion as a follow-up would be, what is logic and what is science and what can we do with that? And you see how all these ideas are great.
And of course, is there absolute truth?
So that's the big question that really sparked a lot of this line of thinking. It was Cy Ten Bruggencate and his whole Does absolute truth exist? And the answer, of course, is no, dumbass. Truth is not a thing. Truth is a label. Propositions can either be true or false, but there's no such thing as raw essence of truthiness unto itself.
Well, no, it's like, so if Saiten comes up to you and says, does absolute truth exist? I would have to say, we'll back up there, good sir. What formal system of logic are we using here?
Or what do you mean by truth? Do you mean reality?
Yeah, what is your truth assignment function, if we're going to go back to the wrap it around to the beginning?
There you go. Again, what's your truth assignment function? So, because if you say truth is simply reality, well, sure, I will concede that there is an absolute, universal, mind-independent, objective reality out there. Nobody doubts this. The problem in epistemology is you're just totally detached from that objective reality out there. And it just hurts me so much to see people not understanding this. Because this is a regular problem we have to face on a daily basis, is we just have this sensory perception that tells us nothing about the ultimate metaphysical ontology of things. You just have sense data. You know, whoop-de-freaking-do. That doesn't tell me about objective reality.
Yeah.
And even if it were, it's still imperfect. It's interpreted, it's subjective, and it's incomplete. I mean, I see a chair, but I don't see the atoms that make it up. I don't see the wood there. I see sort of something that looks like wood.
You see the coating on the wood.
I see the coating on the wood. So you don't really perceive the thing. You have a perception that's extremely indirect around this long chain of causal events. And then, of course, there's the issue of maybe you're a brain in a vat, plugged into the matrix, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I always like to say that fundamentally changes nothing, because I am a brain in a vat. Even under the most ideal materialistic conditions, I'm still just a brain in a skull floating in cerebrospinal fluid being fed information by neurons.
Yeah, I could point out, like, the whole brain in the vat philosophical scenario really is just a rehashing of the allegory of the cave.
Yeah, or Laplace's demon is another one.
Yeah.
Oh, no, sorry, not Laplace. It was like Descartes' demon, I think, right?
Yeah, it was one of those.
Laplace's demon is a determinism thing. Or Cartesian skepticism is the idea.
Yeah,
they're all the same thing. It's called the.
But I have to appreciate the allegory of the cave, because we can acknowledge here that people thousands of years ago were making a distinction between our perception of reality and reality itself.
Right. So it's not like these are new ideas, which is why it's always just frustrating to have to explain 2,000-year-old philosophy to people who tout their expertise in philosophy. Like, sorry, guys, you don't have that absolute perception of reality. You have to make do with something else. That's why we have science.
Yeah, and it's not because there is something better than science out there. Science is the best we can do.
Right. In fact, this is a nice sidebar tangent, is the evolutionary argument against naturalism, which says that evolution only favors beliefs that are functional and useful, but it doesn't really favor things that are true, unless, of course, you're a pragmatist, in which case those two things just became equivalent.
That's true.
So I love how pragmatism is just a giant F you to Alvin Plantinga. Like, no, you're wrong. You don't even understand basic epistemology. You're just talking out your ass. And now begins the profane ranting portion of our video series. So, you know, I guess at this point I'd like to take some questions from the audience, but I wish there was a place I could, you know, post a link for people to maybe come in and talk a little bit or share thoughts.
There we are. It's just open up the YouTube page. It's right there.
So, okay, we'll refresh the comments at least.
Yeah.
You don't even understand. So we've got 74 people. What are your comments, people? We have, let's see, wouldn't truth be that which is objectively demonstrable? That sounds a lot like essentially what pragmatism is about, is committing to an action and seeing what the consequences are that follow. And that's more or less how I would define a demonstration.
Yeah, it's a Muskoka man. No, I'm not pronouncing that right. Yeah, I like it. It's one of those sentences where I appreciate to say it's objectively demonstrable, and absolutely to demonstrate it is a really good way to go. It's a very pragmatic approach. But just to nitpick, to say objectively, well, I could say, you, anti-citizen X, sit in the chair, I sit in the chair, but there's not a third person to, again, verify it. We're still stuck with individual perceptions.
And yeah, that's more or less what nature has given us. So let's stop whining and just make the best of it.
I can only say we can collectively agree it's probably objective.
Yeah. So a fun response you might hear from some theists is like, well, why can't I just axiomatically declare God exists? Or, you know, how does God fit into this framework? And a good answer to that is like, you know, for starters, that analytic synthetic distinction. You can define terms all you want, but you can't define your reality. And let's suppose God is a thing that exists. He's out there in that mind-independent world somewhere.
Sure.
Well, okay, how do I know that? Can I experience this God and go shake his hand? Can I pray to him sincerely and hear voices and receive his advice? Can I regrow amputated limbs or cure cancer by appealing to his omnipotence?
Well, okay, so now you're just going back on the, you're overlaying a pragmatic measure of truth.
Yes, and what they will often do is just say, that's pragmatism, nobody believes that, screw you and your logical positivism, blah, blah, blah. So what do you say to that?
Well, okay, so you have this disembodied mind that knows everything, that exists outside of space and time, that exists outside this universe. Well, I'm going to say I don't care anymore if it's true or not.
Well, yeah, that's the fundamental.
If there is
it's
absolutely
not just that whether it exists, it's you've defined it in such a way that it cannot possibly interact with you in any coherent or measurable capacity.
Yeah, and if it's a we've talked about this before, like, hey, I'm sure there are aliens on other planets that are out there in this galaxy. But until we have any interaction, it doesn't really matter. That they could exist, they could not exist, and our perception of reality remains the same until that changes.
Yeah, and so this is a fun problem, is the idea of aliens. You know, can you say with certainty that aliens don't exist? No, I can't really say for sure they don't exist, but I can say that the proposition aliens exist does nothing for me. If they do exist, then where do I point my telescope to see them? Can I send radio signals to them and expect something to come back?
Yeah, again, some kind of interaction with our perception needs to be established.
Right, so you eventually have a problem where if they're so far detached from any interaction with us, even if they do exist, then as far as I'm concerned, they still don't exist. And it's meaningless to even talk about that absolute existence they may or may not have. If I can't interact with them in some way or another, even if it's something simple like reading a signal off of a radio telescope, if I can't even do so much as that, then for all practical purposes, they don't exist. There is no difference from my perspective whether or not they exist or they don't exist.
Yeah.
So it's a useless distinction to even go on about.
Yeah, and also to point out things like atomic theory was really just a theory. We've never seen an individual atom up close and personal yet. So how can you say they existed before? Again, that's a conflation of truth assignment.
Right. They may have been out there the entire time, but I wasn't able to do anything with that information. The ultimate measure. So this is actually another fun distinction that people confuse a lot. Is there's a difference between the absolute facts of the matter out there in objective reality versus propositions you are justified in assigning as true.
There you go. Yeah.
There's a difference between the facts of the matter and what you can say you know, or things that you can empirically model and make useful decisions on. And those are fairly intertwined. And this is why we can confidently say, no, there is no such thing as a God.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
if
again,
something doesn't mean because it's actually it. or verify that it's out there.
Yeah, so I like empirical verification of things.
It's pretty useful, isn't it? So
yeah, well, it's like to say when a lot of people take in a lot of pseudoscience, which is a topic for another day, I suppose. But again, when you want to try and actually show something works, as opposed to just going with whatever is in your gut that you say, yeah, I'm going to just do that.
Well, I mean, that's a perfectly valid truth assignment, if my gut says so.
Yeah, but you have this expectation that it's going to work out for the best. I mean, the reason why you're going with that particular decision. So, as a case, the anti-vaxxer movement.
Yeah. So there's another.
By and large, you can say, at least for large swaths of first world nations and the United States in particular, so many people are vaccinated that if you get vaccinated or not might not actually matter, because the virus of which you're being inoculated against will probably never come around you. And then it became a whole moot point to get vaccinated or not. But we only get that far because of the vaccination. Sorry, I'm getting into a off-topic rant.
So here, I think we need to explore this a little more thoroughly. So Main Gee says absolute truth exists is false. And he says absolute truth does not exist is true. There is absolute truth, and it says absolute truth does not exist. And the answer to that question is no. Absolute truth, it is not absolutely true that absolute truth doesn't exist. It is only true within the pragmatic framework of truth assignment that absolute truth does not exist. That is a coherent thing to say. It's like, what did we just say? There is no absolute truth. How did we come across that statement? Because that is what the truth assignment of pragmatism leads us to.
Yeah.
You may have a different truth assignment function. Therefore, what do you assign that proposition to be?
Yeah, so to say if it absolutely true, are we saying does this single thing that's absolutely true, does this work on every possible logical framework, logical system?
Right.
Again, if I go back to my hey, there's the utility of my null set logic system.
So I guess a better way to say, is it true that absolute truth exists? True or false? I'll say, what is your truth assignment function? Because within the pragmatic system, the incorrigible, pragmatic empirical rationalism framework, that proposition is false. Then they'll say, well, is that proposition absolutely true, that it doesn't exist, that it's false? And I'll say, no, it is only true within the pragmatic empirical rationalist framework. If you have some other framework, you are welcome to call that proposition true, and it won't help me within my framework to solve any problems or coherently describe something.
Yeah, again, whether it's true or not, so what? It's meaningless.
Again, truth is just a label, and in the pragmatic context, it's a label that means something in terms of effective communication and pragmatic empirical predictability. In your framework, what does it mean? Did you just stamp it with a rubber stamp? I declare this to be true.
Yeah, and then how does absolute truth even work if my system is I'm going to assign truth values to my null set, so nothing gets assigned anything?
So Animating Rebel just joined us. Do you have any specific questions? We're about to wrap up, so we've got about 5-10 more minutes. If you want to just throw out any more questions or comments, just let us know, and we'll finish.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just recently joined, so I had a question based on one of your videos on the topic. You remember your number 2 in your series?
The absolute truth?
Yeah. Okay, so you said, and I'm reading off something I wrote here. You said the reason why any of us believes anything at all is so that we can eventually use that information as a guide for our actions.
Right.
So based on this, I take it you hold to like a kind of Humean view of action. So if I'm taking a stroll with small steps and I suddenly take one large step, what explains that action is the fact that I believe there was a puddle in front of me and I had the desire to get over it. So if I didn't at least try to take a large step, then it wouldn't make any sense for me to say that I believe there was a puddle in front of me. Is that
Yeah, more or less. I
accurate?
can tentatively go along with that.
All right. So now what you seem to be saying is that the reason I believed there was a puddle in front of me was so I could use that information to guide me in taking a bigger step,
Um,
right?
Kind of, sort of, yeah, in a manner of
Yeah,
speech,
yeah, but I think this might be problematic
right?
because the argument that I could not say that I believed there was a puddle in front of me if it had no effect on my actions, it seems that that can only apply if I had the desire to get over the puddle. So let's
Okay,
say I believed there was a puddle in front of me but had no desire to get over it. It
right.
seems then that I could still maintain that there was a puddle in front of me, even if it changed nothing about what I did. So it seems like there has to be some other kind of reason why I believed there was a puddle in front of me, apart from my wanting to use that information to guide my actions.
Okay, I
So
think I see where you're getting. So you're kind of saying, what if I have some piece of information that's totally useless and like I don't care whether or not my feet get wet? Does that sort of
yeah.
make the proposition untrue or unfalse now?
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm getting at.
Okay. And no, that's a perfectly good question. Um, the thing I always try and emphasize is you don't have to like immediately apply everything you learn in order for it to be true or false. It's just kind of that question of, in principle, is this something I could test and measure? If you don't really care one way or the other, then it really doesn't matter one way or the other. But if it did matter, you could then say, well, if I step over it, will my feet get wet or not? And that would be the application of the pragmatic framework. If you have any doubts, if you're unsure, then you are always welcome to go ahead and test it in some sense. And it
Yeah,
does get more complicated than that because I can't exactly test the detection of the Higgs boson on any practical level, but I can at least review the data of others, and then you have a lot of sort of that collective trust you have to have in other people doing their research competently and so on. But at the end of the day, that's sort of the foundation of it all. If someone were to come to you and say, yeah, there is a puddle there, and I would say, how do you know that? And then if they stomp in it and say, okay, see, it got my feet wet, then that would kind of be the pragmatic way of settling it. But if there's no dispute, then so what?
yeah, and I sort of agree, but like I think you're right that we can test our beliefs like through actions, but like I don't think like that's an adequate description. I think like there's more to the issue. It's not simply about actions because remember, you're saying that the reason why any of us believes anything at all is so we can use that information. But this counterexample right here seems to go against that claim. So what I was thinking was, wouldn't it make more sense to say like, hang on, that I believe there was a puddle in front of me because I had a desire to make sense of the world and perceiving things through sensory experience made a part of the world make sense to me. And if I tested that belief also by, stomping into the puddle or whatever, that would make it make more sense to me, I guess, and that would make my belief more valid. So, hence the reason I believe there was a puddle in front of me because that's what made the most sense to me. So it seems kind of false when you say sooner or later everyone has to start measuring the truth of a belief by its power to make us exercise decisions under the expectation of desirable outcomes. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Um, Not exactly. Do you have? So it kind of sounds like again you're just saying if I don't actually care about the outcome, then truth suddenly loses all meaning.
No, I mean, even if I don't care about the outcome, if my belief is what, helps me make the most sense of the world, if it makes sense to me, then I can regard that as true.
So this sounds a little bit like coherence theory then, I think is what it's
Yeah,
called.
sort of.
Just because it makes sense. Well, I mean, you kind of have to ask, how do you come to that original conclusion that there's a puddle in front of you? Well, if I see a puddle, at some point in my life, I probably stepped in one and seen that it makes my feet wet. And so then I would say, okay, from now on, I'm just going to not step in puddles. Or I would base the belief on that instance. Or maybe you could say, if I simply don't, it sounds like you're saying if I don't care whether my feet get wet, then now all of a sudden pragmatism explodes, or I'm not sure.
No,
I quite understand.
no, I actually think there's truth in in multiple theories of truth. I think there's a lot of truth in pragmatism as well as in some other areas. I just don't take one absolute view, so to speak. But I just think that...
Or are you just joining in like right now? We actually talked about like 5 different theories of truth assignment.
Oh, I literally just joined the Hangout right after you sent me the link. I didn't watch any of it, so sorry about that.
We do kind of address how pragmatism encompasses a lot of things, how mental incorrigibility is buried in it, and rational propositional logic is kind of buried in it as well. And that's kind of the overriding goal of these processes, is to help me, like you say, make sense of the world. But simply making sense is usually not good enough if you also have to solve problems and make decisions about things.
What do you mean?
Well, it can make sense to me that the Earth is a flat disk covered by a giant glass dome. Like, that's a perfectly self-consistent way of looking at the world. But it also doesn't help me navigate. I can't shoot rockets into space under that belief. I can't fly a plane from New York to LA efficiently. That kind of thing.
But once you apply other ways of measuring how flat the Earth is or whatever, by taking a trip around the whole Earth and ending right back where you started, then it's also going to make more sense to you now that the Earth is round than it did, that the Earth was flat.
Right.
Basically. So all you're saying is that some things make sense, but they might not necessarily be true. Be true because there might be some other way of knowing about it that makes more sense than that previous belief.
Right. That kind of gets into the axiomatic approach with how propositional logic works. There is a large set of ways you can look at the world that are all internally consistent. But pragmatism is kind of the arbiter that steps in and says, well, if you're true, then we should be able to make these decisions and see these outcomes. If you're true, then we should see these outcomes too. If you're true or if you're wrong, then we should see this and not see that kind of ideas. So in a sense, I would look at what you're saying as the coherence theory of the world making sense. And that's kind of a starting point. Like, you can't really navigate the world if everything is just this blanket random mystery to you, right? It's hard to even go for a walk and notice puddles if you don't even know what puddles are or what roundness is. And you have to kind of assign coherent language to all this stuff. So in a sense, yeah, I can kind of look at coherence as at least like a starting point, a gatekeeper from which to push on beyond to higher levels of verification and testing. But there's nothing terribly wrong with coherence by itself. I would just say is that it's not going far enough. It's incomplete. It's a good filter for bad ideas, but it doesn't differentiate between the good ideas in a sense. Is that kind of answering your question?
Sort of. Like, I get where you're coming from, but I kind of see the same thing about your view. I actually think that whatever you're calling pragmatic or whatever, that itself falls under coherence, essentially.
That's an interesting way of saying it. It is one of the pragmatism is itself one of the coherent ways of assigning truth, you're saying.
Yeah. So
again,
what I'm just trying to say is that I don't feel it's right, like, to restrict what we consider to be true based on, how I'll how this decision will how this sorry how this belief will guide me in making a certain decision when I apply it.
Yeah.
So to speak, that's what I'm saying.
And we did talk about that a little earlier, and the fundamental point is, well, we got to wrap up soon, so I'll make a point. We'll let everyone finish here. But the fundamental problem is when you categorically reject pragmatism, it's not very long before you start wandering out in the street and getting hit by buses, because that effectively means you've detached your beliefs from any capacity to make decisions. And then you make bad decisions because you aren't tying them to what good decisions and good consequences will be like. You don't have to follow this absolutely. And this is something we talked about as well. There's this whole possible range of truth assignments you can work with. The only point we kind of make is if you're not being pragmatic, you're going to get squished by a bus at some point or another. But there are also areas of your life where you can just completely avoid pragmatism altogether, like in what is the Star Trek problem, for example, the Enterprise versus a Star Destroyer. Is it true that the Enterprise would defeat a Star Destroyer in space combat? You can think of ways to assign truth to that answer, but they will totally be detached from pragmatism. And
All right.
but the problem is you get to the issue of how many angels can dance on a head of a pin. You can argue your way to an answer to that, but you also kind of have to deal with the so what problem. I mean, you just...
Well, yeah, okay. Sorry I'm going to just interject. Right back to the puddle. Is that puddle, does it have a flat surface or is it slightly curved? What's the truth to it? Okay, so pragmatism, I want to say, gives you the option, I want to say, of whether you actually even need to determine a truth value to it. No one said we ever actually had to. So if you never step in that puddle, or if it doesn't matter about what kind of consequences you go with, if it's flat or curved, so what? If it's wet or dry, it doesn't matter about what truth value assigned to it because you're never going to reference that truth assignment to anything else that you're going to do. So let it be true, let it be false. It doesn't matter until you have something else as a consequence to it.
All right. So what you seem to be saying is that
I want to say
it's hard to make sense of what you're saying because you seem to be saying like it doesn't matter what's true unless it's useful. But then you're saying whatever's useful is that is what we're going to consider true, and we're going to exclude everything else. Is that a correct analysis?
Yeah, but we're getting there. I would say, what's the goal of having a truth assignment?
Well,
I would say that when you use it in conjunction with other things, then the relevancy of the truth assignment is what comes into question.
Yeah, well, like I said before to Auntie, what I would tie that back in, like the relevance of believing that there's a puddle, that it would satisfy my desire, to know about the world and to make sense of the world. So that's how I would, say it has relevancy.
Yeah, sure. So if you never have any interaction with that puddle, then you're satisfied with both a true or false connection. Once you've made the assignment, then you're satisfied?
There's a lot like the problem of aliens. Is aliens might exist out there in the Milky Way, or they probably don't. Which one is true? Well, from my perspective, I cannot do anything with that information either way. So in a very strict philosophical sense, it is totally useless and meaningless to me to declare one way or the other. I simply cannot make use of those propositions. They don't help me make any testable predictions of any information or experiences. So in a
Yeah,
sort of, it sounds a lot like the puddle problem you said. If I simply don't care either way, then why are we even talking about whether or not it's true? Does that make sense?
yeah, I get it, but how would you? I think the other guy, what's his name?
Charkopolis.
Chalkopoulos, yes.
My
You were
entropy is higher
saying
than yours.
you were saying something in respond right before Enti got to the alien thing. Uh, I told you that the relevance is that my sensory experience tells me that there's a puddle, and my sensory experience, based on what I see from it, that's basically what allows me to make the most sense of the world. So when it comes to the aliens, whether or not aliens exist, neither belief is gonna, help me make sense of the world because, we have no clue about whether life is out there or not. So that's why I would say that it's irrelevant, whether or not there are aliens out there, that there's no point in talking about them. But when it comes to direct sensory experience, yeah, that is going to have an effect on my decisions. And it's going to also satisfy, someone's desire to know things and make sense of them.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you understand where I'm coming from?
You also have to ask, what do you mean by makes sense? Do you mean it makes sense in that it's internally, emotionally satisfying to you to think about it that way? Or does it make sense in that it's consistent with actions and consequences within some empirical framework?
Well, I would say it's consistent, based on what you know of the world, and basically it essentially satisfies you. The best word is to say it's convincing.
Well, convincing is kind of a subjective road to go down there as well.
Well, yeah, and of course it's not that simple. There's certain nuances with this on what we're going to consider to be convincing or not. But the point is
one of the
that
smartest things you've ever said. It's nuance. I'm glad you say that because a lot of these issues are very nuanced. People tend to have these sort of black and white absolutist perspectives. But when you say, no, it's complicated, it's nuanced, I'm happy to hear you say that because it really is. Which is why I think, pragmatism, again, cuts through the nuance by saying, well, if you look at it this way, it means we can make these decisions and solve these problems. If you look at it this way, it solves those problems, but not this problem. And so which problems do you want to solve, in a sense? So on that note, I'll let everyone finish up because we do need to wrap up, and my bladder is going to explode. So Annie, go ahead and give us your final thought.
I don't really have much to say. I mean, I wish we could discuss this further, but
that's all right. We have more time in the future
for now. So,
Chargopolis, what is truth? Go.
Wow, talk about an almost arbitrary thing. It's okay, as we discussed, taking a pragmatic approach to understanding truth, by and large, will solve most problems that we have in the world. That is not to say it's a perfect system, but give me a better one and I will jump on board with that one. Until then, I'm going to just stick with that for daily life.
That's kind of an interesting point. I'll finish by saying pragmatism is not perfect, but it works. And if you come up with something that works better, well then, by definition, we'll just lump that back into pragmatism again, and it'll be pragmatic. So, by definition, in that sense, you can't do better than pragmatism, because the moment you do, you will have been pragmatic. Or pragmatism will greedily scoop it up into its pragmatic umbrella in that sense. But, like I said, the most important thing, I think, at the end of the day, is just what decisions you make. What problems are you trying to solve? What expressions are you trying to lay out? What are you trying to say? What do you mean by these ideas? So I hope we've answered a few good questions about what truth is, and especially what truth is not. So on that note, thank you everyone for watching.